episode 10 of Sir Ulric hosts Money Matters. This episode is special to me. This guest is one of the people that established my walk, my journey in the Bitcoin space. He's the author of The Price of Tomorrow. He's a brilliant innovator, a technologist, a futurist. I welcome Jeff Booth to my show. How are you, sir?
Great, and great to see you again.
Right on. So Jeff, it's funny. You're basically one of the first books that I've read in the Bitcoin space. It wasn't the Bitcoin Standard. It wasn't Vijay Boyaparti's work, but it was your book, and it will always stick out to me. I remember I had the privilege of being on stage with you at Pacific Bitcoin for a small moment of time. It's kind of a really quick event with Anders hosting it, and he brought on Lawrence and Jeff and James, not Jeff, Greg, all these people. Oh, Jeff Ross. Yeah. And so I remember this moment, like it was, and he talked to each person, and and it was my turn to speak, and I was like, these people have impacted my life, blah, blah, blah. And for some reason, because your book was the first one I read, I said, like, especially, Jeff Booth with The Price of Tomorrow, and Lavish, being a wisecracker, he kind of like, oh, maybe you'd like to sit next to him. He stood up, switched places with you. And, he pushed you into me, and we gave each other a hug, and everyone was like saying, oh, it was so embarrassing, but funny and like exhilarating at the same time. So it's like one of those really good memories. This whole group that's on stage, you guys really have a good manner about you. And it was just a blessing to interact with you that one day. I'll never forget it.
Yeah. Right back at you, by the way. And when you see that picture describes a whole bunch. So these moments we're going to look back on, and just like they're incredible moments on this journey.
Absolutely. I want to get started. I want to talk about two things. The first thing is, first of all, what you're working on. You're throwing a lot of your valuable, scarce time to this Ego Death fund. This Ego Death, it's an investment fund. Is that what it is?
Yep, venture capital fund.
Venture capital fund. Maybe you can summarize that. Like, what exactly are you doing with Ego Death, with Lynn? Talk to me about Ego Death.
Yeah, and I've said this on numerous podcasts and on stage and a couple of places, but I've actually found myself being a hypocrite in the Bitcoin space. And that was a really tough thing to deal with, and it was a tough thing to deal with as I understood what this meant, and as I understood what it meant for all of humanity, that we would move to a system that would enrich everybody instead of steal from people to enrich a few. I had a hedge against the existing system collapse by holding Bitcoin, and I was talking about Bitcoin all the time, and I was meeting people like you and friends all over the world and talking about this, but I had most of my energy in the other system, and I had most of my energy, so boards and the like, and the other system. So I created Ego Death, or I partially am a co-founder of Ego Death to resolve that conflict in myself. So I could spend more energy advocating and helping the entrepreneurs building to the world I wanted to see. And that's what it looks like. And I actually can't, I have a hard time describing how great that is, because it's so incredible. And when you're spending your time in this ecosystem with people who are building in this ecosystem, it feels like just all of your time expands. And so when you said work or doing, it doesn't actually feel like work at all. It feels like just, I love working with these people. I love spending time with these people that are building the rails for all 8 billion of us to thrive.
And yeah, I really vibe with that, with the work I do with SWAN, with this project right here. You would think I have my own career, and then all of a sudden, after I go home for my normal 8 to 5, then all of a sudden I start doing this. But it's like no, this is, I get to do this. This is a privilege. Yeah, it's important. So again, read your book, big fan, obviously. But there's something that I've always wanted to ask you. I've never had a chance, even in the few times we interacted. Price of Tomorrow, obviously not about Bitcoin. You mentioned it towards the end. And was that purposeful to keep an achievable hard money solution as the underlying theme where not explicitly mentioning Bitcoin? Or did you find out about Bitcoin halfway through writing it? And I'm like, I'm not going to rewrite this. What's the story about keeping Bitcoin in a minor role in the in that book?
Because you have to understand the problem before you can understand the solution. And if you start with the solution, people tune out. And the problem that we're dealing with is this challenge to a system that we live in and measure from, or most people live in and measure from, to a new system that we will measure from, that'll drive abundance, is such a mental challenge, because there's never been the hooks to be able to hang on to this in any of our history books. There's never been something that looks like this. So you had to create almost the logical pattern, or at least for me, and even in that book, I had to take very disparate islands of knowledge and create from game theory to how we act, us versus them, to all of these dispersed things, just to carry that through line through that whole book without going too deep in any one of these, because you just lose the reader. But ultimately, it had to get to people to see themselves and say, yes, you're right. Technology should make things more productive. Why is that not happening? And then through that almost conflict, the resolution in your mind, you keep asking that question. You can't sleep at night because you're asking that question. What's stopping this? What's happening? And then only then you can start to realize here's the solution. At least that's what my premise was. So I knew about Bitcoin before, and I'd owned Bitcoin before, but I will say this: I didn't actually understand the magnitude. Even at that time, I thought it could still. At that time, I thought there was a 5% probability that it could get co-opted, because everything in history had been, and so I didn't understand it at the level. I thought it was a plausible one plausible way to the other side. And I was really curious if people had other plausible ways, and then as I tried to disprove that over time, I just became. Even when I said ego death, it was a process for me to move my energy into the system that I wanted. So when I watch people go through their own process now, and whether they're at level 1, 2, 0, 5, I'm just watching their process.
I can vibe with that when I talk to some of my people in my normie circle, my no coiner circle, and I can see some of the ones that want to get it, or want to understand, want to see the things I'm talking about, and they're tearing down these shrouds that they don't realize how they got there in the first place. A lot of it was their own presuppositions, assumptions. A lot of it was propaganda placed onto them by the world that they live in, and it's fascinating to see people that aren't yet there, but it's breaking through.
So 2 people in the last week have come up to me, and one, a very good friend of mine, so a very good friend of mine, his wife, and she said, "I've been following all your work." And he goes, "I don't quite understand it totally yet, but I understand it. But there's a profound truth in it, and I know that, and so I want to keep with it, because I know it's true. I can't even tell you how I know it's true, but I know it's true." And so now she's going through the path to understand. But that's what it happens. You have to, just like I did, you have to break a whole bunch of the things in your brain that you used to think that you built your entire knowledge base on top of, and those things are hard to do.
Ego death.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had a quote recently in when I don't know if you first formulated in Madeira or for Madeira, but you said, in the natural state of the free if the natural state of the free market is deflation, why isn't it true for the world we live in? You kind of mentioned that in a previous question just now, but answer me this: why is the presupposition that the natural state of the free market is deflation? What makes that intrinsically true?
Because so you can see it in your actions. You can see it in you're choosing this podcasting service. You're choosing through all your actions to gain more value, and from a very different argument. So entrepreneurs try to solve problems, and there's always a business that has the market today, and entrepreneurs competing at that business to solve problems. And you would not use the new business unless it solved something for you, unless it made something better, cheaper, faster. And so our actions for the output of the entrepreneurial process is more value, or marginal cost of production falling to zero over time through those actions. A different way to look at it is, if Google charged you $5 a click tomorrow, you wouldn't use it anymore. You'd use something else. And so you can see your own actions in the things you buy, choosing things that give you more value. Now, if you were different, if all of us chose...
I didn't get that. Could you try again? I found this on the web.
Was the government listening in on you?
I guess so. Yeah. So, go ahead. Yeah, but if we all chose things that gave us less value, you could see there being inflation in the market, but especially today, where technology is eradicating a whole bunch of things that we took for granted. And I got asked this question last night, so I'll build this deeper, because then you could say, okay, well, it's just trading, because goods and services don't get any cheaper. It's just trading on a fixed currency. It moves from here to new holders. But that's not how the market works. Whatever was there before is always under threat. So if something has the highest margin in a market where other prices are falling, what would entrepreneurs attack? They would attack the industry with the highest margin, because there's more money to make there. And so that process continues to happen until prices, like your calculator app, fall to zero.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. These are the kind of things where it's like, for the audience, you're literally getting the economic lessons, the Austrian economics lessons that you would never find in college. And we're demonetizing that right now. You don't have to pay $50,000 to learn from Jeff Booth. You can listen to that in Sir Ulric Money Matters. It's a beautiful thing.
So just really quickly on that, here's a super interesting thing. I didn't read any Austrian economics books, not a one, before I wrote my book, which I find fascinating. I didn't come with a mental construct that was right or wrong. I didn't read it until after, and I realized, wow, there were a lot of people that thought about these things a long time ago, but you never had a money that could allow this to happen. So
right.
So it came to the exact same conclusions. I just came to the conclusions through a different lens.
You came to the conclusions through rational thought, through putting one thing after another. It could be the engineer in you. And I think that's why I identify so much with Michael Saylor. You know, he broke down why, money, the properties of money, and why Bitcoin has those to survive this world. Your order of understanding how technology evolves. Yeah. But all of these things, working with the incentives of humans, that's and the individual human, as opposed to basing it on the collective, which is more a Keynesian approach. Again, I read The Ethics of Liberty by Rothbard right after your book. I'm like, you guys, it's like the old meme, like, please tell me the difference between these two pictures. And it's like, it's the same picture.
Yeah, and which is really interesting, because it just shows how knowledge advances. And who knows, if I had heard that subconsciously as I was right, but or somebody had said something, and you just don't know where the knowledge comes from, and then all of a sudden you have an insight, and then you see, wait, that's connected to this other insight, and that's how the world works. That's why, in fact, that's why it's deflationary.
That's right. That's right.
We together solve problems, and the output of solving problems is we together all win in a system, in a free market system. More people added to that, faster winning for everybody.
That's right. You did mention that when it came to Madeira, how so many people are coerced or subjugated, billions, and we have a small subset of literally people in the free market. You referenced Gladstein and how he fights on the front line to enable financial freedom for people in Africa. The Southeast Asia, South America, and if we can unload somehow break those barriers to entry into the free market, all of a sudden people wouldn't be scared of AI. They'd be scared of the competition that comes out of those billions of people, and then all of a sudden you have more deflation.
And play that forward. It means that in the system that I'm describing, all AI and robotics, all of the benefits accrue to all of the people on the planet, and life gets cheaper and easier forever. And you could call those people today Bitcoiners, but they also help all of the other people on the planet just by reinforcing that. So even if you didn't own Bitcoin, it forces, you don't need to own money to breathe the air you're breathing.
That's right.
And that's so right. More and more things are going to look like that through the nature, through having a system like Bitcoin, because it forces the free market to work. So we do have a free market, and it's exploding in Bitcoin. It's just most people are operating in a non-free market.
Yeah, they're operating in what they think is capitalism, or what they think is free market capitalism. It's probably more akin to crony capitalism, or even fascism. People love their governments, and from a generational perspective, generally boomers believe that they can vote their way to abundance. We got to find the right candidates, and millennials have never known a world without exorbitant spending. Governments just spend. That's the only world they lived in. How does one go from getting another to see the corrupted incentives of the state and crony capitalism? How do we become that evangelist for this is the way, and the thing that it's not working and it's not going to work?
Yeah, and I think that when I think about that, I think just about going down, just kind of go 0 to 10 on, you don't know anything, you believe in the state, you believe that a political actor can fix this, or that you need inflation in an economy. You start there, and as you go the other way, 1, 2, 3, and you understand all of the things you used to think are wrong. As you get to 10, you pay no attention to the other system, and you spend all of your time in the new system. But on the way through that, you first defend your reality. And how do you defend your reality? Because really what you're saying is I said this to a bunch of YPO members recently, and because they were same thing about free markets. I said, okay, well, the free market is deflation. They agreed with that. That the existing system you live in requires inflation to survive. Otherwise, you have a complete catastrophic debt collapse because the debt can't be paid back. So how do those things for you go together, right? So if the free market is deflation, then what you're saying is at some point, if you wanted the free market, all of your assets that you own would be literally worth 0, pennies on the dollar, but you'd still have the debt against those assets. So your house, instead of being $8 million, would be worth 100,000, right? At what point as that was falling and you were liquidated, would you vote for governments to print more money? And you just saw like complete silence, and so for me, I like, because this is true, and we're dealing with people that don't know it's true. So you have to catch them in not in a bad way, but in almost see their own hypocrisy, like I saw my own hypocrisy. Because you're unwinding those patterns that people have a strong belief for, and once those patterns are so strong in their brains, that they believe that their success is because they've lived in a free market, and they can't see that it's actually more coming from stealing from other people. And the higher you are in that system, the more you're stealing from people. And the closer you are to and then what ends up happening is it gets worse as the closer you are to the political establishment. Then changing regulations, laws to protect your business and hurt somebody else's business or hurt another country, you just get caught up in that, and you don't want to see. You don't tell yourself you're bad. You don't tell it's the incentives, and you don't want to look at this the incentives of the system, because it would uncover some ugly truths in you. And for me, I went through that process, and I think everybody's going through that process at some point or another. They are definitely going to go through that process, because Bitcoin is imposing this. It doesn't care if you want to print 30% more pieces of paper or 80% more pieces of paper. It is imposing the free market, and if you don't have to understand it. You can continue to price in the other pieces of paper, or your assets relative to the other piece of paper, or businesses generating cash flows in those pieces of paper. But you're going to be essentially liquidated by Bitcoin.
Yeah, people think that Bitcoin is just kind of a token for trading use cases and trading games. They don't realize that it's literally the epitome of the free market. It's the manifestation of the free market for the first time ever in a global setting. It's remarkable. So the government has tools that they can use to infringe or to manipulate the free market. And Ray Dalio mentioned these, and you quoted him in your book, the 4 levers of government: austerity, debt defaulting, central bank printing, and egregiously tax the rich. Ways that they can price fix the economy. Now, I don't want you to rehearse the definition of these word for word. People can just go read your book for the definition. But I want to know, if Bitcoin was just right now apex money in the world, how do these levers change, or how are they impacted?
It's a completely new operating system. That isn't. That's why I say the better way to look at it, instead of a coin or anything else. It's a protocol. The base layer of the protocol is open, permissionless, open, decentralized, and secure protocol, bounded by energy, creating energy abundance by its very nature. So we have something tethered to energy that can't be changed, or very hard to change. The nodes control this, and that's what keeps it decentralized. So through that lens that you have a protocol emerging around the world, then all of those things that governments could or couldn't do to run their economies, and false measures like GDP or based on a construct, those fall away. And all prices relative to Bitcoin fall forever in that system. Now, it'd be volatile on the way, but all prices forever will fall against Bitcoin. So what does that mean for a government? What are they going to have to do? They're going to have to move, instead of preying on you and stealing from people to be able to expand government, they're going to have to serve you. And voters will choose over more and more. Voters, Milei in Argentina, Bukele in El Salvador, and voters will choose what services governments wants, and governments are going to have to get a lot smaller in the free market, because you won't be able to survive off stealing from other people. Now, a lot of governments are going to try to block the rails, because if you think about the political class and the type of system that we have today that is built on this theft, that you have people going around, and many people actually believe they're helping in that system. They don't know that like it's just a warped incentives, that they're actually making this. You're playing prisoner's dilemma, a global game of prisoner's dilemma, where even the wealthy in that game of prisoner's dilemma are making the outcomes far worse for themselves, and they don't know it, and they're constantly playing the game. So you're getting more theft, more. So it's feeding back on itself. So all of the outcomes, the emergent properties of us, or the emergent behaviors of us inside that system, would obviously mirror the system. If you could get to the top of that system and control it, you would want to, because it means you're stealing the productivity that should flow to everyone else at a higher and higher rate forever, and you amass massive control through AI and robotics to control populations. So, of course, a lot of people will be in that and give that strength and feed that back, because they think they're helping a sub part of the problem within the problem. But again, the system can't fix that, and it ultimately means governments all over the world who have always competed for the best labor and capital will be competing in time for the best labor and capital on Bitcoin. So they'll be competing for you. They'll be competing for all of the entrepreneurs that are building into this ecosystem, and in service of their citizens. And if they don't, they won't be elected, or they'll go away.
For anyone that's been following any of my work over the last 3 years, that kind of summarizes exactly what I always say. And of course, you hear a lot of my source material right here. When you consider that the government, where it's supposed to be, again, people who work for the government, they're supposed to be civil servants. Why does it feel like we are serving them? Bitcoin essentially flips things back to reality, how things should be, and the government is going to look to say, we can do this for you, the individual, rather than what we go through now, where we have the US spending $7 trillion and only taking in $4.5. Imagine a government that has to be solvent. What happens then? They have to reduce themselves in order to be solvent, to be efficient. And then when you talked about, Jeff, the closer you get to the top of this system, the money printer, the more your incentives are to propagate it, and you think you're helping, and then you're also stealing from the productivity of those at the bottom. And you had an example at Madeira talking about the Congo having 70% of the world's cobalt, and the laborers are making $2.50 a day or an hour, something low, in high risk labor conditions. And then you think about, it's paradoxical because we're in this kind of EV movement. We're in this kind of like wind, solar, battery dynamic. Batteries are booming, but the Congo isn't getting any richer. And you can say the same thing when you think about Russia and Ukraine with their natural resources of wheat and oil, the production capacity of people in factories like in China or Indonesia producing tennis shoes. Our world's trade network is growing so fast, but these people aren't benefiting from it. Do you believe that government currencies, do they create kind of an artificial regions that essentially kill free market economics for these people that are actually producing value?
Yeah, so through Bitcoin, permissionless, open, decentralized protocol, you have a free market emerging all around the world, and people can trade. And so all economics, I think it boils down to these two things I'm about to say. Prices fall to the marginal cost of production in a free market, and we trade with each other all over the world to gain more value. In Bitcoin, that's what's happening, and that it's growing very fast as a result. That means anything stopping that is not economics. It's a control structure. And that control structure, if you could, let's use the US as an example and Democratic Republic of Congo as an example in this. If you could convince people to use your pieces of paper, and they would take debt in your pieces of paper that you just made up, and then they couldn't pay that debt, so they had to revalue the currency over and over and over again, you could keep their labor rate low forever, because they'd and you could extract their resources for almost nothing. you could leave. It would be modern day slavery, but you wouldn't have to move the slaves. You'd keep everybody in their countries. And so when I say what this looks like around the world, that's what it looks like around the world through a monetary system of monetary slavery. And you would and because what are you doing? You're stealing the productivity that should flow to them through your instrument of pieces of paper. And they think those pieces of paper are worth more than their pieces of paper. So they make your pieces of paper stronger so you can keep up the game. Now China right now is trying to play the same game by doing the exact same thing with Belt and Road and different nations that the US is doing to try to make their pieces of paper stronger. But Bitcoin is cutting through all of those nonsense games that humans have played forever, because it would just make sense if you could. That's why I said a law in human nature is like for 5,000 years. If you could steal the productivity of everyone else, if you could do it in a city, you'd just gain what the natural rate of deflation plus your inflation rate in a city. If you could do it in a country, more people. If you could do it in the world, all people. So of course, people through fear, greed, people will try to do that. Bitcoin eradicates the ability for them to do that, and it puts every human being to, whenever they want to, on an even footing to come into the Bitcoin network.
So there's a part of your book that I really wanted to touch on, and I want you to kind of explain this. It's the first time I ever heard of Swanson's Law reading your book. And for those who don't know, Swanson's Law indicates a steady 20% in reduction of the price of solar cells every doubling of its production rate. And I think that since your book, I think there's even been another doubling of production rate, and it's still kind of holding firm. There's a lot of articles talking about Swanson's Law back when your book was written, but there's not a lot of talk about it now. I don't know if it's leveling out or not, but when I think about solar, I think a lot about government injection into the free market, and one of those heavy. Go ahead.
Misallocated capital. Yeah.
That's right. And one of those major ones was in 2022, the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, which, even though it's called the Inflation Reduction Act, we have, 369 billion allocated for climate change and green energy investment over the next 10 years. So even long after that administration is gone, they're going to be still printing for those efforts that may or may not be what the incentives of the people are at that time. So does the cronyism behind the solar industry concern you, potentially creating a government-driven bubble in regards to solar and all kinds of renewable energy?
Yes, is a simple answer. Without that, we would probably have nuclear a long time ago, or without all of these that would look very different. Now, I wonder, in kind of as I go deeper into this, I wonder the reason we don't have that. If the reason we don't have that is it would have given abundant energy earlier, and it would have ruined the dollar system earlier. So I wonder but either way, human beings solve problems. We're going to break through, and we have energy abundance today on this planet. Now with Bitcoin mining, we have a free market incentive to chase energy abundance. So all of these things are the most efficient is going to win, because Bitcoin has a reward for the most efficient, and it's chasing energy abundance. So in fact, that's why I say it's a protocol tied to energy, bounded by energy, and creating energy abundance, because through that protocol, you have free market incentive to price energy, and whatever is the best. Then there's going to be thousands, millions of shots on net, right? For what that, and some are going to fail, and some are going to have major breakthroughs for energy. And energy, as the output of all of that work, energy is going to move to almost free.
It's a beautiful thing. And, you know, it seems like how we are, again, the government involved with this narrative around energy. It doesn't seem like energy will ever become more free. In fact, it looks like it's becoming more expensive over time, especially where these solar efforts are enhanced. I live in California, and our benevolent Governor Newsom passed a law last year talking about zero emission vehicles must be sold by 2035. New vehicles by 2035 must only be zero emission, new cars and light trucks. And when we think about that, again, solar, wind is clearly an energy source, but obviously much less reliable than traditional, than fossil fuels and nuclear. But should the government be sticking their hands in the free market, dictating what regular citizens should be purchasing for themselves to work out their own path in an abundant life? I feel like the government is saying, oh, this is good for you, but isn't it the individual that's supposed to pursue their own abundance? There's a
so this is where there's a nuance to this that I want to I just want to explore that nuance in different ways. So yes, and you'd be hardcore Australian economics, government just get out of the way. But in a global game with all the governments, let's just say the internet came out of the Department of Defense, right? And having the internet and a bunch of the companies that were early on the internet gave the United States an incredible advantage. I'll make even a way simpler example. So in India, if you go to India, they have really great technology and everything else, but the road network is so atrocious, even in the cities, like you can't get anywhere. So what is the cost of productivity on that road network to all people within there? So that means that people are less productive because they're having to spend time on that on going 2 blocks. They're an hour in their car. So it's less productivity. So could you make an argument in that? So we're going to borrow, or we're going to spend money to make this more productive, so we can win global adoption. And so that's where I think the nuance is. And there's certain industries that you might say, just like an entrepreneur does, we need to win this industry. We need to win this. If we don't win AI, if we don't win robotics, if we don't win these industries, and they're all won by another country, what would that look like? So I understand the nuance in that. I don't want governments, giant behemoth government, taking everything away. But if I was voting for somebody and they had a rational case for why the thing they were going to do was going to build more prosperity for me, I would look at that argument.
No, that's well said. That's well said. And we'll see, at least they're not taking away used cars. So we'll see what happens in 2035. I feel like I'm going to buy another dream car of mine in 2034 and ride it out.
but the more important thing is that when you're looking at it from the system you're looking at it with, it's all misallocation of capital, because it's all just printing more pieces of paper to measure the world by. Then relative to those pieces of paper, energy always has to go up. Housing always has to go up. Everything always has to go up. So, and then from the very system, you talk about environmentalism, and so the same system that is creating the problem, because it's a Rube Goldberg machine that has to grow forever by printing more pieces of paper. And it can never satisfy, so it has to keep on printing more pieces of paper, and most people are measuring from that. I just simplify that whole thing and say inflation equals climate change. Like if somebody is from that system, there is no way to solve the thing that they care about. Now, I'm not saying it's real, not real, everything, but there's a whole bunch of people that believe in that narrative so strongly and are actually making the problem worse.
That's right.
far worse from the system that they believe they're solving the narrative from. Just like there's a whole bunch of people that would believe on left or right and Trump or Biden can solve this issue. And they're making this, they're actually strengthening the system that makes it worse for them.
It's amazing how much I see these narratives, these videos put up on Twitter, whether it's left wing or right wing. I mean, just recently, I think I saw, I don't know if it's real or not, it looked like a movie, but people were storming the Tesla factory in Germany, and likely probably left wing people. But again, like they're storming the factory that makes e-vehicles, and I think they're probably more likely to be Greenpeace than the average Joe. And you have to wonder, like, what is their goal of protesting this electric vehicle factory? And you kind of get this feeling like all these different bodies, political bodies, are starting to realize that there's a greater problem than the clear-cut ones that they may have had 15 years ago, maybe because the problem is accelerating. Have you noticed that, like the
So and why I wrote the chapter in my book about us versus them? I remember when I first wrote it, some of the first people who read it said, well, why is that chapter in here? And why is that? And I said, because that's where we're going, right? The system has to divide you. And most people will spend their time within the division thinking it's the other person or the other side of that issue, and they'll make the system stronger. Like you could see all of it's a control system. And it's not a free market system. It's not something that drives abundance. It has to drive scarcity. And to drive scarcity and that control, it has to drive you further into fear. It has to create other enemies, and so you're paralyzed with fear. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to escape. So you give it more. You think you're solving it from your issue by making it stronger.
There is this thing you mentioned in your Madeira speech, and by the way, I didn't go to Madeira, but your speech was the only one I listened to, and not because I don't like anyone else, but it's like these are, when you go on stage, your humility kind of exudes out of itself. You, Michael Saylor, you, as successful as you guys are, your ability to communicate these abstractions, it doesn't always have to get into the technological weeds of what Bitcoin is, but you're there because of the why. And so you talk about the 500 million minds preying on the 7.5 billion. We kind of alluded to that earlier in the podcast. But a lot of people think Bitcoin is evil because it's not socially distributed like some UBI coin. And there are these people who are not in direct benefit of the money printer. It's not, government, it's not Elizabeth Warren saying Bitcoin is bad. She knows that if Bitcoin wins, she loses. We're talking about regular Joes, people that just work a 9 to 5. It's like Stockholm syndrome. Why do a significant chunk of the 500 million in, the West and first world, why do they defend the 5 to 8 million, the absolute elite, so fervently?
Yeah, and think through that. So that if you just said that a lot of your wealth in Europe, Japan, US is coming from an expensive Africa, South America, Central America, and it's and that's dividing for it. If you're at the bottom of that social economic ladder, there's always somebody above you stealing more, but you're stealing from the other people. And it's just like I said before, it's hard to see in yourself. You want to believe it's only those people above you. You how dare they, without saying, what am I doing? How are my actions contributing to a world that I say I don't want, but I'm making stronger? And so that's again, that's as you go down the depth of this rabbit hole, you start to face these existential crises in your own mind, because you realize, I have to choose. I don't have to. I could put my head in the sand and just ignore it. Or or I could fight it. But what am I saying if I'm fighting it or ignoring it? Fighting it, I'm saying I would prefer to live with theft and money at a greater and greater amount because I'm getting enriched by it. And I don't think people that are actually saying that actually really understand what it's doing to their soul. That's what, so they might think they're winning short term, but they're massively losing. And then if you're paralyzed by fear and you just want to ignore it, then things will get worse for you. So I understand what the human action and why people do this, but you're also seeing just the presence of Bitcoin. More and more people are starting to understand what you understand already, what I understand already, and once you're there, you're never moving back. And so as that gets bigger and bigger and bigger, just the world transitions to this ledger. In fact, we're living in the future already. You can see it. Like, you go to these Bitcoin conferences, you start to meet the people, you see what's happening in the sector, and you're just filled with hope.
Yeah. You mentioned this sector. It used to be a niche. It used to be a little hole in the corner of a room, and now you call it a sector. And I mean, sector, industry, this thing is massive, and it came about out of nowhere. And 15 years over the course of 100 years of the world reserve currency for the U.S., 300 years for the length of time that Western nations have been actual recognized nations in the world. You have this thing that's Bitcoin, and all of a sudden it's legitimate in such a short time, and it's not a bubble, but people think of it as a bubble. But there is the difference between this and a bubble is that there's substance to Bitcoin, whereas there's this ethereal affinity kind of a vaporware is what Coin Icarus would say, is vaporware with all of those other things, from Forex trading 8 years ago to cryptocurrencies now, IPOs back in that time as well, or ICOs back in that time. So it's just kind of funny that we see, we witness it in firsthand, and I try to encourage people, you got to go to these conferences. It's so different. I have this question, and it's kind of like almost like a master's program kind of question. GDP is obviously a cracked out formula. It doesn't make any sense. Like, from a Bitcoiner's perspective, I can't see that a country is stronger because they have an add-in in there that's called government spending, and the more the government spends, the better your country is.
It goes up.
Why don't you just spend to infinity? Why do I need to buy something? Why doesn't the government just buy everything for me? Why don't we just go pure communism?
Well, Kelton would do that.
Kelton? Oh, the MMT woman. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I gotta let you go soon. We have another hour. There's a way to let me just ask the question. In a world where fake growth, in my opinion, GDP is fake growth, because you can't grow to infinity. It's irrational. It's just playing with numbers. It's not a measuring stick in real life. How do you determine change in the economic state of a political body, of an economic body, of an entity, without using GDP? In a Bitcoin world, how do we decide this entity was okay and now it's better or worse?
So when people say growth without deflation, they don't understand growth. Productivity growth is deflationary. So you can't have a measure out of any of those other systems. Those measures, by very nature, the measure of the system of a free market is the deflation in the market. So prices get cheaper for all 8 billion people in the world. Life gets better over and over and over. Every year it gets better and better and better. Where's the metric to measure your air you're breathing? It's ludicrous. right? And all of these things are going to drive us to abundance. But so all of the measures that people are doing, inflation is a measure, GDP is a measure, all of these measures, they're constructs of a system trying to stop you from enjoying the productivity that should naturally flow to you.
Yeah, it's I always trip up my friends with this one simple answer. It's like you have a house, you have these things that are essentially non-technical, and they are oftentimes education. They're oftentimes highly regulated, highly impacted by regulators, aka the government. But then you have things that live more in a free market world. And when you think about that, you think of things that are built on transistors. You think of computers. You think of video cards. You think of TVs. And you can see the deflation in real time. And you can see that by maybe the money goes up. Maybe the dollar is weaker every year. But why is that TV that's twice as good as the one I bought 2 years ago? Why is it the same price? Why is that TV that's 4 times as powerful $300 cheaper than the one I bought a year ago?
And just play that. So it's one of the, actually, when people show those charts, I hate those charts because they're not pricing in real terms. They're pricing in fake terms. It's way worse than that. In fact, deflation is way worse. And all of these things that have become free, like this podcast that can touch millions of people, that it's free. It's the cost is we're both donating our time. And why can we donate our time? Because we want to in this free market to help other people. And it can. That wasn't around before, right? To be able to do this inside GDP, you'd have to get on planes. Only a few people would know. Couldn't just that information wouldn't be hotels. All of the cost to be able to do this, and it's free today. Your calculator app, all of these things, they're free. So now, how many extra things do you have to? You have less things that you can push up in price and manipulate up in price with your pieces of paper.
That's right. And so technology, you can see technology trying to burst through this fiat construct that we live in. And those few things, again, airplanes from back in the day, the televisions and the internet now, they're trying to burst through. And I think Bitcoin is essentially that final death blow to this fiat economy that will enable us to live in abundance.
I think just one thing. It's going to take a long time because I recently I've said what I said before about measuring your life in a piece of paper, and you can see this if you go to whatever Bitcoin is today. But if you go to Turkey, you can see what they believe the piece of paper is worth to price their world. If you go to Argentina, just pick up Bitcoin price versus all of these pieces of paper, and then ask yourself, do other people in these other countries believe in their piece of paper? And the answer is, of course they do. And so they stay stuck in it while they're getting destroyed, relative to the piece of paper, all prices are going up, and their wages relative to pieces of paper are going down. And they stay in it and they give it more and more strength. And then when you understand that, then you start to say, well, what about you? And every single person measuring Bitcoin price in a US dollar or Canadian dollar is making the same error. And they can't see it in themselves. Bitcoin doesn't care about all these things. All prices relative to Bitcoin are falling, and they will forever.
Jeff, again, you've been impactful for me from afar. You've been impactful for me in person. And today, I'll never forget when you graced me with your presence to come on my podcast. It's been a blessing, and look forward to seeing you the next time, probably in Nashville in the summer. Thank you so much for coming on my show.
It's great to see you, my friend. Great to see you.
Thank you. So that was Jeff Booth, episode 10. It's kind of exhilarating when you get to have the person that impacted you greatly in your Bitcoin journey come on and speak to you face to face. Those kind of opportunities come to you whether you start a podcast, whether you go work for a Bitcoin company, whether you just go to a conference. So for those who are struggling in their Bitcoin journey, I encourage you, get out and meet some Bitcoiners. It will change your perspective. It will reinvigorate you. It will keep you mentally solvent on this journey. I'm Sir Ulric, like my father before me. See you next week.